All right, everyone. Very warm welcome to all of you. Today, what we're essentially going to be discussing is the reaction of the Indian population, general Indian population, to the partition of Bengal, right? Because in the last segment in class itself, we had discussed the various nuances of the partition of Bengal in the year 1905. So let us basically look at what the public reaction to this actually was. So, if we look at the entire scenario, I think it becomes very obvious that this is an event which is going to make a lot of people very very angry, right? It is going to essentially infuriate a lot of people, right? And when I talk about the leaders of that time, that is the Indian National Congress, right? In that particular sense, both the moderates and the radicals were vehemently opposing it. So they became united at that point of time, and they realized that this is not really done, and this is really regressive and communal, and they were protesting against it. And of course, the one way of a peaceful protest is to conduct large public meetings, protest demonstrations and rallies, and all of that. That was one way that was adopted in order to register a formal protest towards this regressive move by Lord Curzon. And one of the highlights that happened, one of the highlights of this entire situation with Bengal was that it gave birth to the Swadeshi movement in Bengal, right? Swadeshi movement, you may or may not have heard of before, right? Basically, in a nutshell, it is a movement which helps Indians to realize their own inherent capabilities. Talks about how we really need not be dependent on an external power to govern us essentially, and how we as Indians are able to would be able to successfully administer and control our own country and our resources, right? So if somebody asks you to describe Swadeshi movement, it basically had a couple of features, right? The first one, of course, being, I think that's very obvious, the opposing of the British rule in India and the fight for Swaraj, right? Swaraj is complete and total independence from foreign rule, right? And then, of course, you had the encouragement of the ideas of self help and self reliance, which even these days Prime Minister Modi is promoting in the form of Atmanirbhar Bharat, self reliancy, being self reliant, self sufficient, right? And of course, the encouraging of the use of the local languages, the vernacular, versus the English language, which was a foreign language for us. Promoting Swadeshi enterprises, that is the made in India, make in India sort of a situation. Businesses which thrive, which have originated in India and thrive in India, right? Swadeshi enterprises. And of course, promoting the cause of national education, very, very important, right? In order to make the general public more aware, basically more aware about things that are being done to them by the British administration, right? To that extent, you will realize that for the fight for Swaraj, the radicals particularly adopted a lot of new methodologies like mass mobilization of people, getting them together, walking in marches, like huge rallies basically, where everybody's just walking in protest, and of course boycotting of British goods and services and institutions as well. Now when I talk about institutions, I am referring to colleges, schools, courts, those kind of institutions which were established by the British government and were administered also by the British government. Simple, right? So now, again, I think we have discussed this before as well, that the Swadeshi movement was essentially born in Bengal, right? So Bengal, as I told you, was the cradle of Indian nationalism, the Desh Bhakti movement, the nationalistic movement, right? But eventually it spread throughout the nation, okay, to different parts, and in different parts of the country it was known by different names. Like for example, when it spread to Andhra, it was known as the Vande Mataram movement. The names might be different, but the fundamental features of opposing British rule, encouraging ideas of self-reliance, promoting Swadeshi enterprises, use of local languages, promoting national education, they were all the same. Right, so that there was not much difference when it really came to that. Okay, cool. Let us move a little bit ahead. This is what basically was the fundamental reaction of both the radicals and the moderates and the Indian National Congress, generally speaking, to the partition of Bengal. Fair enough. Okay. Now let us move on to a slightly more important conversation and a very relevant conversation in the Indian national freedom struggle, and that is basically the formation of the All India Muslim League in the year 1906. That is 1 year after the partition of Bengal by Lord Curzon. Okay, now from an analytical point of view, what needs to be remembered is that the partition of Bengal was probably one of the first instances which sowed the idea into people's minds that Muslims and Hindus are separate entities and they do not really belong in one particular nation together. Right? You realized when Bengal was divided, the so-called western part of Bengal, which consisted of Orissa and Bihar as well, that was predominantly Hindu, and then the other half with Dhaka as its capital, which also included Assam, right, was predominantly Muslim. Let us trace our steps back a little bit and see probably from where really does this idea of Muslims not belonging to this country really stems from. Okay, long time back, in the late 1800s, there was a very accomplished Muslim scholar by the name of Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan. Right, he was again a barrister, foreign educated once again, of course, and he was basically a Muslim philanthropist, reformer, social reformer, whatever you might want to call him. But perhaps his one drawback was that he was one of the first people who pitched this communal and a very regressive idea that Muslims really do not belong in India, right? They do not have anything common with the Indian culture and identity, and that they are essentially a separate nation and they should have a separate nation, which would have nothing to do with the Hindu dominated parts of the Indian subcontinent, right? So he was Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan. And to be very honest with you, just for the sake of the upliftment of the Muslim community, his grand idea was that it is better for us to, side with the British administration rather than fighting against them, because perhaps, in his opinion, the British would be able to essentially do a lot better for the social upliftment of the Muslim community in India. Right. So, as I've written over here as well, he suggested that the Muslim upliftment could happen in a better manner if the Muslims aligned with the British rather than fighting against them. Problematic, like really problematic, right? Because at a time when nationalism was really growing, people were beginning to form this identity, this national identity that yes, we are united, that yes, we are Indians. Such a regressive ideology would probably not be in the best interest of the freedom movement. Right. Now, eventually, as the years pass, the partition of Bengal can probably be called as a spark to this entire Muslim identity issue. And it so happened that 1 year after the partition of Bengal happened, in 1906, you have the creation of the first All India Muslim Party, so to speak, which is Muslim dominated. Okay. And that is known as the AIML. Okay. It is known as the All India Muslim League. Simple enough name. Right. And it is formed on the 30th of December 1906. Very simple date to remember. Just one day before New Year's. Right. So 30th of December 1906, the birth of the All India Muslim League happens. And I have, of course, given certain analytical points over here. So we'll just go through them once. Right. So try to correlate, okay? 1905, the partition of Bengal happens along communal religious lines, and basically the seeds of communal hatred are sown during the partition of Bengal, which perhaps facilitates or makes easier the creation of the Muslim League in India, right? And again, just like Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, right, who was one of the influences for the Muslim League, they were very supportive of the British rule initially. Okay, initially is a important word. Okay, and the British, in order to further divide the Hindus and the Muslims using their divide and rule policy, they had actually encouraged the creation of the Muslim League. They were like, haha, go ahead, make the league. It's okay. We are there with you. We are gonna stand with you. Typical divisive behavior of the British government. Right. So they encouraged the creation of the Muslim League. But within the next roughly 7-8 years, they start pushing for an independent self-government in India, right? So they stop supporting the British. They stop supporting British rule in India, and they actually start, just like the Congress Party, they start fighting for an independent, Indianized, proper Indian self-government in India without British interference, right? So that is by 1913 that they start doing that. Cool. Now one might ask that what do you think were really the objectives? Like, why was the All India Muslim League born? What was the grand idea? I mean, Congress Party was doing its bit anyway. So what's the deal, right? So you need to understand that Muslim League, the name itself, as it suggests, is very Muslim centric, right? They basically had three fundamental policies. First one was to ensure the adequate representation of Muslims in central and provincial legislative assemblies, right? That is the parliament, the central parliament, and the state legislative assembly, which is there in all the provinces. Now, since that time there were no states, we call it provinces. So provincial legislative assemblies, right? They were of this opinion that Muslims are not being adequately represented in lawmaking bodies like the central and provincial legislative assemblies. So they wanted to facilitate that. Then, of course, they wanted to safeguard the political rights. Since it's a political party, of course, what they will want to do is safeguard the political rights of Muslims, very obviously. And if there are any concerns regarding a non-adequate representation, they will convey those concerns to the British government. Fair enough. And of course, last but not the least, prevent the rise of prejudice and discrimination against the Muslim community in society. Right? To counter any stereotypes, to counter any prejudice, counter any discrimination against the Muslim community in the society. So basically, Muslim centric, Muslim focused objectives of the All India Muslim League. Fair enough. I think it's very simple to understand. It's not very complicated. Right. Cool. Now, how do they go about ensuring this adequate representation for Muslims in central and provincial legislative assemblies? Okay, now this is important. The Muslim League in 1908. Okay. The Muslim League in 1908 met at Amritsar. Okay. Met at Amritsar under the leadership of another very high profile intellectual person whose name was Sir Syed Ali Imam, right? So they meet under his guidance, under his leadership at Amritsar, and the Muslim League comes up with this idea that in order to ensure adequate representation for Muslims in the parliament, that is the central legislative assembly, and in the state, as in the provincial legislative assembly, there must exist a concept of separate electorates for Muslims. This is extremely important for you to understand. Okay, I will explain what electorates are very briefly to you. Just give me 1 second. I will explain it here. All right. Now, say for example, let us put it very, very easily. Okay. Say for example, this is a state or a province. Okay. Say for example, this is a state or a province, right? Now, for the sake of elections, in order to make the elections a lot more smoother and a lot more easier to conduct, this state is divided into tiny, tiny areas. Okay. You will, of course, be studying this in ninth properly. But for now, a general understanding is enough. Okay. Now, the state is divided into tiny, tiny areas like this. Okay. Now, what happens is that each of these tiny, tiny areas that are being divided, each of them would be conducting, I mean, when the elections happen, the elections will happen simultaneously in all of these little areas that I have carved out of this province. Okay. In today's terms, these areas which are divided for the sake of elections out of any particular state or country, these are known as constituencies. Okay, what are they known as? They are known as constituencies. Okay, now, what the Muslims wanted were that in order to ensure greater representation for Muslims in, say, for example, province, say, for example, this is the United Province from British India, United Province, UP, जिसे हम बोलते हैं, United Province. Okay, now say for example, this is the United Province. What they are demanding is that we want separate electorates. Basically, what separate electorate means is reservation of constituencies. All right, reservation of constituencies solely for Muslim candidates. Are you able to understand? Now, say for example, if this is constituency A, okay? Say for example, this is constituency A. Now, in constituency A, we have a Hindu candidate, we have a Muslim candidate, we have a Christian candidate, and we have a Sikh candidate who are fighting elections. Okay. Same goes for maybe constituency B also. Same goes for constituency C also. Now, say for example, constituency D, for example, this is constituency D. If it is a reserved constituency, okay, if it is a reserved constituency for the Muslims, that means that in this particular constituency, only Muslim candidates, okay, only Muslim candidates can fight elections. Are you able to understand what is happening? All right, only Muslim candidates can fight elections. So that automatically means that if I am reserving certain constituencies for the Muslims, that will automatically mean that the number of Muslim candidates in the parliament will definitely increase. क्योंकि उस constituency में with apart from any Muslim, in a reserved constituency, let me just write it here. In a reserved constituency, right? In a reserved constituency, apart from a Muslim candidate, right? Apart from a Muslim candidate, no one else from any other religion can contest or fight an election. Simple enough. I think it's pretty straightforward. Right? Pretty straightforward. ठीक है. तो now you understand what the demand is कि हमारे लिए constituencies reserve करो. बहुत simple है. That same thing is known as the reserved constituency का synonym is separate electorates. That's the same thing. Okay, there is no difference. Same ditto thing. Okay. The British were initially hesitant for probably 5 seconds, but then they realized that yes, अगर हम Muslims ko, if we give them separate electorates, it is going to help our divide and rule cause. Obviously. And because of this, the British accepted this request in the Morley Minto reforms of 1909. Excellent. So the British come up with these so-called reforms next year in 1909, which are known as the Morley Minto reforms. Okay? And in these Morley Minto reforms, for the first time, look at the progression, okay? For the first time, Muslims are given independent separate electorates to fight elections for the central and provincial legislative assemblies. ठीक है? Simple enough. In case you're not able to understand, please pause the video and watch it again. Right? Okay. And initially, when the Muslim League was formed, okay, many of its leaders, including the world famous Muhammad Ali Jinnah. For those who are unaware, Muhammad Ali Jinnah is the founding father or the so-called father of the nation of Pakistan. Okay, fun fact. Okay, just like Mahatma Gandhi is the father of the nation of India, Muhammad Ali Jinnah is the father of the nation of Pakistan. Right, including Jinnah, they were very supportive of the Hindu-Muslim unity and brotherhood and all of that. Right, initially. It was only towards the end of our freedom struggle, that is from the 1940s onwards, when the idea for the independence of India actually started becoming a reality. Ki, okay, now perhaps in the 1940s we will be able to achieve independence. When that started becoming a reality, that was when the Muslim League started demanding for the first time, like proper, formally, for the first time, a separate nation for India's Muslims. And the one fundamental reason why they started doing that is because they feared, it was a phobia, that in an independent India, it would be dominated by Hindus, which to an extent is true. It still is dominated by the Hindus, which are the majority religion. Right, that in independent India would be dominated by the Hindus, and the Muslims would be unable to get adequate representation with a Hindu majority in the country. Are you able to understand their logic? Right. So their logic is that if India becomes independent, Hindus are going to rule. It will become a Hindu state, and Muslims are not going to get proper representation. So it is better that the Muslims leave the country, is their general idea. Okay, of the Muslim League. Fair enough? Simple. So this is Muslim League for you. Alright. It started off as a political party which wanted to fight for the rights of the Muslims and representation in the country. It demanded separate electorates for the Muslims. That demand was accepted by the British in the Morley Minto reforms of 1909. And then you had one of the most important figures called Muhammad Ali Jinnah, very controversial figure as well, who initially pitched for Hindu-Muslim unity, but by 1940s ended up becoming the founding father of the state of Pakistan that we know today. Right. So, and you now understand their reasoning behind why they wanted a separate nation for the Muslims, because they felt that Muslims will be dominated by the Hindus in an independent India. Simple. Cool. Now, 1 year after the formation of the Muslim League, right? While the Swadeshi movement is still going on parallelly, now this is happening parallelly. A Partition of Bengal protests are still happening. Swadeshi movement is still going on, right? Now the Congress meets at Surat. Surat is in Gujarat, okay? Congress meets for its annual meeting at Surat in 1907, okay? These dates are important, children, okay? These dates are important and they're not very difficult to remember. Okay, so in the Surat session of the Congress in 1907, there led to a very, very intense debate between the moderates and the extremists regarding how the Swadeshi movement should be taken forward. Okay, I know it sounds very bizarre, but that was the debate. Because the moderates felt that the movement should be restricted only to Bengal where it was born. But the extremists, being radical, of course, they realized that no, This is not the time for it to be restricted only to Bengal. We need for this movement to spread to the entire country. And there was this huge debate between the moderates and the extremists where they realized that their ideologies are very different, okay, that their manner of functioning is very different, and they decided to break up. Okay, it was a very tragic relationship and they broke up. Okay, so this is known as the Surat Split. Okay, if somebody asks you to define the Surat Split of the Congress, this is how you will mention what was the reason behind the Surat Split of 1907. Right, fair enough. But of course, they got back together in 1915. It was a happy ending. So that's that. Okay, so they split in 1907 and they reunited after a couple of years in 1915. Right. And more importantly, in 1916, okay, that is 3 years before the start of the First World War. In 1916, the two major parties in India at that point of time, which was the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League, right? This is 1916 we are talking about. Okay. They signed an agreement with each other that, okay, we are going to keep aside our differences of opinion and we are going to fight together for a proper self-representative government in India without the British rule. Basically, fight for the freedom struggle together and while keeping our differences aside, right? It is a historical pact wherein the Congress and the Muslim League are coming together for the first time, right? Very important event as well. So the Congress and the Muslim League sign a pact which is in Lucknow. So it is known as the Lucknow Pact of 1916. Right. So of course, if somebody asks you what really is the Lucknow Pact, okay, from 1916, then of course you will talk about this. Right. Fair enough. So this was the session for today. I hope it was interesting. I hope you got to understand the creation of the first Muslim party in India, historic Muslim party in India, which was the All India Muslim League. I hope you understood what their demands were, what their concerns were. And the Surat Split is important, the Lucknow Pact is important, right? And yeah, so that brings us to an end. Thank you so much for listening and have a good day. Bye bye.